Good evening and welcome to the January 31st meeting of the Glendale City Council. Mr. Kasakian, roll call, please.
Councilmember Garpetian.
Here.
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 Fine.
Here. Next, please.
Next item is a flag salute led by Councilmember Najarian, followed by our invocation.
Please rise and join me in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for this evening's invocation. President Lyndon B. Johnson, in his special message to Congress on the nation's cities on March 2nd, 1965, authored the following. The American city should be a collection of communities where every member has a right to belong. It should be a place where every man feels safe on his streets and in the house of his friends. It should be a place where each individual's dignity and self-respect is strengthened by the respect and affection of his neighbors. It should be a place where each of us can find the satisfaction and warmth which comes from being a member of the community of man. This is what man sought at the dawn of civilization. It is what we seek today. These words seem more relevant today than ever before. Tonight we meet in these chambers of our city government to give meaning to these words through our actions. We pray that our decisions are made with wisdom and blessed with foresight for the betterment of the quality of life for all of our city stakeholders and everyone who works to make our community the best it can be. Amen.
Amen.
And what's next, please?
The agenda for the January 31st, 2017 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council is posted on Friday, January 27, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Next is presentation and appointments. At 3A is agenda preview for the meetings of Tuesday, February 7th, 2017.
Mr. Beers?
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, for the Glendale Housing Authority for February 7th, we have one business agenda, Director of Community Development. This is regarding the Housing Authority execution of a letter of loan commitment and lease option with LINC Housing Corporation and National Community Renaissance of California for a proposed affordable senior housing project on Housing Authority-owned land at 5th Street and Sonora Avenue. Also in the afternoon, we have a special meeting of the Glendale City Council. We have two items, Director of Community Development, approval of alternative project delivery method for the proposed Grayson Repowering Project, and Director of Community Development, Grayson Repowering Director, this should be GWP, I'm so sorry, Grayson Repowering Project labor agreements. Both of these items are under GWP. For February 7th in the evening for the City Council meeting to commence at 6 p.m., Director of Public Works, this is regarding geotechnical soils engineering and materials testing report, and this is a review for on-call services. The Fire Chief, this is a report regarding the annual weed abatement program for 2017. Director of Public Works, this is as-needed security system services at various city facilities. Director of Public Works, Grandview Neighborhood Library renovations. Director of Public Works, downtown Glendale internally illuminated street sign name replacement. This is the first phase of the project. Chief of Police, this is pre-hospital care for professional emergency medical services. And lastly, under consent, we have City Attorney. This is regarding findings supporting denial of design review case 126 through 132 Kenwood Avenue. Under action items, we have two items. Director of Public Works, this is contract for the provision of parts and services for the maintenance of city-owned Ford vehicles. And we have the City Attorney, and this is regarding street performer regulations. And that concludes my report, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. What's next, please?
3B is proclamation for Korean American Day.
Okay. And T.C. Kim. And I guess this should have been presented back on the 13th, but we weren't, we weren't in session yet, so it's a little delayed.
Good evening, everyone, Mayor and the council members. I'm here with the President and the Chairman of the Korean American Federation of Los Angeles that represents the 10 different cities, including Glendale. They actually represent about 70,000 Korean Americans in this neighborhood, including 10,000 Koreans in Glendale city area. After the centennial celebration of Korean American immigration, the Korean American Foundation was established that helped pass a law in California state legislature 14 years ago proclaiming January 13th as the Korean American Day. And United States Congress followed 2 years after. So now this year is the 14th Korean American Day in California and 12th Korean American Day in the United States. And I'm also the executive director of Korean American Foundation USA. Each year, this January 13th, we celebrate Korean American Day by remembering and also commemorating and educate about the Korean American heritage, history, and immigrations, our culture. At the same time, this time, what we'd like to emphasize is that something that we don't often do enough, which is to express our gratitude. We, as Korean Americans, especially in this Glendale neighborhood, we want to really thank you all for having an interest and concern for Korean American community in these neighborhoods, and also to your commitment and willingness to work with us in Korean American community for the betterment of this community. And third, to help us proclaim this Korean American Day each year. And Mayor, you have proclamation to read for us.
I do, and I just want to reiterate what you say, Mr. Kim, that we are happy to collaborate and to join the Korean community in everything that you do, in all of your projects, and whatever we can do to help. So I'll read the proclamation. Whereas Glendale and its adjacent cities are home to approximately 700,000 Korean Americans, the largest concentration of Koreans outside of the Korean Peninsula, and whereas the history of Korean immigration to America began as 102 courageous Korean men, women, and children ventured across the vast Pacific Ocean aboard the SS Gaelic to land in Hawaii on January 13, 1903. And whereas they did not falter in their pursuit of the American dream, but through tenacious effort and sacrifice, established a new home in a new land and educated their Korean American children. And whereas while the first Korean immigrants fought for the freedom and independence of the motherland, their children grew up to be patriotic American citizens, served in the armed forces of the United States during World War II, and made other important contributions to mainstream America. And whereas, in search of better opportunities for their children, beginning in the 1970s, a multitude of dynamic Koreans joined the increasing flow of immigration to the United States, and with diligence, fortitude, and a strong belief in the American dream, these immigrants turned depressed areas into thriving communities and raised their children as productive Korean Americans. And whereas the community enters a new era and creates new history, we must instill in the upcoming generations proper appreciation for the courage and value of their ancestors, a deep sense of their roots, and pride in their own cultural heritage so that they may better contribute to this great nation, rich with ethnic and cultural diversity. Now, therefore, I, Paula Devine, Mayor of the City of Glendale, proclaim January 13th, 2017 as the 14th anniversary of Korean American Day. And I will have Mr. Sinanian present that to you, but I cannot think of a better time in our country's history than to read a proclamation like that for the Korean American community. Thank you so much for your contributions to our city, our state, our country.
Also, as a small token of appreciation, many events throughout the country celebrating Korean American Day. One of them is art contest. And I have here some the winners of the art contest for children. They made a calendar celebrating Korean American Day. And I'd like to present this to everyone at the council. And it's a beautiful drawing depicting the friendship between Korea and the United States. Kids drawing, and it's already in here. So I'll be passing this out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Comments? Councilmember Sinanian.
I'd like to wholeheartedly congratulate the Korean American community on Korean American Day. The relationship between The Korean American community and every other community in Glendale is best, I think, personified in the relationship between Glendale and sister and friendship cities in South Korea. We have a very strong bond. Just 2 weeks ago, we were hosting Mayor Jong from Boone County again. We had the pleasure of him visiting City Hall, and that relationship is based on strong values, and we're still very, very proud that we are home to the Comfort Women Memorial, one that's identical to the Comfort Women Memorial in Seoul, Korea. So congratulations, and we wish the best things to the Korean American community.
Councilmember Garpetian?
Yes, ITC, long time no see. When you said the art contest, I was scared for a second. I thought you were going to ask us to make an art piece or something, so participate in an art contest. But I want to congratulate you as well. Korean American communities started being more active in Glendale a few years ago. I remember that we started that Korean Armenian Cultural Day, and my wife was very instrumental in starting that with the rest of the members of the community. And we started learning from each other's culture and heritage and appreciate each other. And that's what the community is all about. And I want to congratulate you again and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
Councilmember Najarian?
Thank you, Mayor Devine. I will echo the comments of my colleagues. We are so proud to have such a vibrant Korean community in Glendale and the foothills, and we're so enamored with your culture and your work ethic and your creativity and your athletic ability through your children in the sports. We're just glad to have you here. So again, as the mayor said, there perhaps is no better time in the nation's history than to welcome an immigrant community warmly and ask them to continue to proliferate and add to our multicultural city. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next item.
Next item is the consent calendar. Consent items, the following are routine and may be acted upon by one motion. Any member of council or the audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before a motion is proposed.
Any
I'll move the consent calendar.
I'll second it.
roll call, please?
Council members Garpetian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine.
Yes. Next item.
Next item is city council and staff comments.
Council? Mr. Garpetian?
Yes, just want to let my fellow colleagues and community members know that we're going to host a few fundraising events to raise funds for the cost of transportation of the fire trucks that was donated last week. And I just want to let everyone know that I'll let you know when the dates are so everybody's invited and go from there. Hopefully we can raise the funds to has nothing to do with the city or council. This is being done outside this council, but I want to let everyone know, and everybody's invited. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Sinanian, Councilman?
Madam Mayor, I want to request that staff bring a report on this issue of the window, this elusive window ordinance. Apparently, from what I remember, I thought we'd resolved it by coming to a solution that would not unfairly penalize those individuals that bought their residences as bona fide purchasers and ended up with windows that were somehow not in compliance with city regulations. But since these notices are going out to residents, apparently I'm proven wrong. So I want staff to come back with a report, and I need support from my fellow council members to figure out where it is that we're at, what's being enforced, what's not being enforced.
Yeah.
Thank you,
We have
Mr. Najarian.
I'll second it or agree to that.
And I just had one, I had a really great experience this week attending the Youth Leadership Conference that was put on by the Character and Ethics Project. And it took me back to my days of teaching on the high school level. And it was just fun to see the future in our youth. And I commend Character and Ethics for putting on this conference. It brought together youth from Glendale and Burbank. And we talked about how to become a leader, what is a leader. And I found that they were very insightful, and it was a great learning experience, actually, for all of us. So that concludes my comments. And let's see, are there any public comments, cards?
There are, Mayor.
Oh.
There's one.
Okay.
3-minute public comment.
Great. Okay. Community events, Roberta Medford.
Hello, I'm Roberta Medford from Montrose. I'm happy to be here representing Glendale Beautiful as the chair of Arbor Day 2017, and I believe it's on the City Council schedule, and that we have a commitment from Mayor Devine to come and give a message from the city, but we hope that everyone else can come also. The event is March 7th. We'll be holding a community celebration for Arbor Day, and all are welcome, actually, whether you donate or not, although we do really love donations. The event will be on Tuesday, March 7th, commencing at 10 a.m. at the Casa Adobe de San Rafael Park at 1330 Dorothy Drive in Glendale, and that's 91002, I think. In case of rain, it will be held in this Glendale Civic Auditorium lower level, but Coco is on the job of keeping away the rain for that morning. The important date, though, is that donations are due on February 28th. And actually, if you go to 2 places on the internet, you can find the traditional donation form. It is linked under the city event calendar on glendaleca.gov for the donation for the deadline date of February 28th, and it's also linked under March 7th. And then you can go to our pretty new glendalebeautiful.org website, and there you will find the form for downloading and for mailing in the donation, as you always have. Or if you wish to pay by credit card, that is an innovation that we are trying this year. And on the glendalebeautiful.org website, you can make your donation and pay by credit card. So trees are a wonderful contribution to the beauty of the city, but they also help with the problem of the climate harming carbon dioxide, because they absorb the carbon dioxide, and they make a lovely tribute for a loved one or a special event or a special cause. And we're very happy to have the trees. We will have remarks at the event by Mr. Dan Hargrove of the City Public Works, and I understand that he is involved with the street trees, which are of some concern because of the drought, even though we're now getting some rain now. So we look forward to him speaking about the health of our public right-of-way trees in Glendale. I think that's about it. So we hope to see you on March 7th. And remember, the donation deadline is February 28th. So we can get you a certificate ready for the time of the event on March 7th. And as I said, go to the city website on the events calendar, and you will find 2 places to download the form under March 7th and under February 28th, or go to glendalebeautiful.org. Thank you very much.
And the price of the donation
and the price of
is
the tree
$40.
is still only $45 after all these years for a tree. Thank you.
Well worth it. Well
Yes.
worth it. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for the 3-minute public comment, we have Frank Gallo.
Good evening. My name is Frank Gallo. In 2013, when City Council approved the electric rate increase, several taxpayers came here to protest, and close to 2,800 people submitted signatures asking you to reconsider. Mr. Najarian was reminded that the increase was illegal, yet he still voted for the increase. Right after the increase took place, the Glendale Coalition for Better Government, a group of residents and business owners, filed a suit against the city. On January 19, 2017, the Los Angeles Superior Court issued a judgment against the City of Glendale, granting several of the plaintiffs' petitions and commanding the city to return to Glendale residents and ratepayers close to $60 million. The city was found in violation of its own charter by transferring money from the Glendale electric utility to the city's general fund without going through the channels prescribed in the charter. The city was also found in violation of the state constitution by increasing the electric rates in 2013 and using the proceeds of that increase to pay for costs unrelated to providing the service. That violation was deemed by the court as an illegal tax since the city bypassed the electorate. Mr. Mohill, who has been here talking about the issue at almost every single meeting, has been ignored. The city could appeal that decision in hopes of getting the decision overturned, but it risks accruing further legal costs that by now is probably in the millions of dollars. Besides that, there are other lawsuits that have set precedent on that matter. According to the words of some of the junior council members, you indicated that if the city was to be found in violation of the law, you will not support the transfer. What will happen now? Would you appeal the decision? Or would you follow your words and uphold the law? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next item.
Next item on the agenda under adoption of ordinances is 7A, ordinance amending section 8.44.010 and sections 5.5, 8.58010, 8.58140 of the Glendale Municipal Code 2000 relating to the construction and demolition debris diversion program. This was introduced by Councilmember Sinanian on January 24th, 2017.
Okay. Do we have any comments or the motion for the ordinance?
I'll move the item.
Second?
Roll call?
Councilmembers Garpetian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine.
Yes. Next item, please.
Under action items, 8A is Director of Community Development regarding establishment of interim development standards and identify procedures for ministerial approval of accessory dwelling units. 8A1 is an introduction for interim ordinance. 2 is a motion initiating zoning code amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, ma'am. Just very briefly, historically, the cities, local governments often quarrel with the state over issues of local control. And one of the issues of local control that is most vexing at times, and certainly the one that generates the greatest amount of dialogue, is that over land use. These things, there's discussions over land use and what is appropriate in the halls of the legislature versus what is appropriate with your collective vision for what you want this community to be based on the support and feedback that you get from your constituents. Oftentimes is manifest in different initiatives that become bills and may become state law or ultimately fizzle out and die. These types of discussions then sometimes take on a life of their own when they are overlaid with other policy initiatives. In this case, what our CDD department is going to present to you is a discussion about such a dynamic, local control over land use overlaid with this overarching policy desire to, theoretically at least, increase affordable housing. This is an interim ordinance that deals with accessory dwelling units, and with that, Laura will walk you through the details of this first step as we try to reconcile that which is right for Glendale with that which is now state law. So with that, Laura.
Thank you. Mayor Devine, members of council and staff. Oops, I'm hitting the wrong one. What am I missing? Click.
Right there.
There we go. Back in 1996, the city passed a resolution that would prohibit second units or granny flats in the city of Glendale. And as Mr. Ochoa said, we had two recent bills that took effect January 1st, AB 2299 and SB 1069, that repealed Glendale's prohibition of second units. And instead, it made a state law where we have mandatory approval of second units subject to ministerial action. What that means is if it's ministerial, we do not have discretion over allowing second units. The state regulations are now in effect in Glendale. We have 120 days to approve or deny a request for an accessory dwelling unit. The standards that are provided by the state are quite minimal. There's a copy of them in your packet. All single-family residences and residential zones would be eligible for an ADU. That's why we feel an interim ordinance is necessary, and that's why we prepared one for you. What the interim ordinance does is it establishes local standards, and it would be effective for 45 days, although that may be extended, and that allows us time to prepare and vet a more permanent ordinance that may be appropriate for Glendale. Under the state regulations, again, it's ministerial, no DRB, no CEQA, and I know that concerns a lot of people since we put a lot of effort into our design review. Therefore, as part of the ordinance, you'll see, and I'll go over in a minute, we do have some architectural guidelines we have. Even though it is a ministerial approval, we're trying to use some of the same standards we use for architectural compatibility that we have in design review. Also, the state allows accessory dwelling units or second units in all residential zones. In Glendale, this would be our single-family zones as well as our multi-family zones. A lot may have only one single-family house on it to be eligible for an ADU. So I know we have some houses that are located in multifamily areas where you may have more than one single-family house on a lot. Those would not be qualified for an ADU. It's only when you have one house on one lot. What we do allow right now are guest houses in Glendale. We've allowed them for a number of years. That we call them accessory living quarters. Guest houses are allowed to have up to 500 square feet as a detached dwelling. It could be, or it's actually a dwelling. It's a detached accessory building. What that means is they're designed to be livable quarters, but there's no kitchens, no parking required. They're not allowed to be rented out to anybody. They're strictly for residents of the primary unit and their families. The FAR that we use toward accessory living quarters, the floor area ratio that you have toward accessory living quarters counts toward the entire property. That's the way we control development and the size of units on property. We use floor area ratio. How big is your lot determines how much square footage you can have. So under the proposal that we have right now, and the law we have right now, you could have up to 500 square feet count toward your floor area ratio. That could be an accessory dwelling unit. That could be a guest house. What we're proposing is that ADUs, accessory dwelling units, become or have the ability to become ADUs, accessory dwelling units. They must have a kitchen, a bathroom. We can require parking, and they may be rented. We can require an owner to live in a primary residence or in the ADU on site. So you would have, basically, it wouldn't be an absentee owner. You would have an on-site owner that would live on the property. And then the state also states that we must have independent access to the unit, the ADU. So our interim ordinance we follow the same 500 square foot maximum we already have for accessory living quarters. It's very close to our existing code. When we picked a number, staff had to come up with a draft. The reason we picked 500 square feet is we thought that was a minimum number. We know it's already allowed in the city for accessory living quarters. We were conservative because in the past you prohibited second dwelling units, so we tried to be as conservative as we could. We're looking at allowing one guest house or one ADU, not both. We're also recognizing that ADUs may be attached, detached, or the property owner may convert an existing guest house or garage to be an ADU. So these would be existing dwellings converting. They could also build new structures for ADUs.
zoning standards that we have in the city apply for floor area ratio, lot coverage, height, landscaping, setbacks, and parking. We intend to apply those to the extent that we can, but there are some exceptions. I'll go over those. All buildings that have livable space must meet building and safety codes. This is no exception. The only change that there may be for an ADU is that fire sprinklers in an ADU will only be required if they're also required in the primary dwelling. So we basically have our random ordinance kind of breaks ADUs into two types. There's an attached and a detached. For detached ADUs, these are, if you think of in your backyard where you may have a garage that's not attached to your house or a guest house that's not attached to your house, these are the standards that would apply. If it's an existing permitted accessory structure, such as a guest house garage, all they would need to do is come in and make it habitable. An accessory dwelling unit, a guest house, would already be habitable. So you may see changes if someone's making a garage habitable. You may see some construction, but we would be permitting those. Zoning standards would apply except for new construction on a garage conversion. If somebody's actually taking the garage, they are allowed to add a second floor under state law. The only difference is the new construction must be set back at least 5 feet from the property line. So if you're familiar with a lot of our garages, they're right on the property line. If someone was going to add a second floor, they would have to set back that second floor. And we also are adding a height limit. Right now, our current standards allow you to have a garage, but that's limited to 15 feet. We're proposing that because a second floor would be allowed, it could go up to 25 feet or 28 feet with a pitched roof. That matches our R1 standards, our single-family residential zone standards. For attached ADUs, these would be ones that would be either within an existing dwelling or be added to an existing dwelling. They could be located with a primary residence or garage. And if they're within the primary residence, they must have independent access. Also, I would just note that if they are within a garage space within an existing house, there may be quite a bit of construction also associated with that because you would need to bring it up up to a habitable space standard. We've identified some preliminary architectural criteria. Again, this is ministerial. We don't have, if they meet the criteria, they go. We would have to approve it. So it's not like, it wouldn't be subject to a hearing like our regular design review process is. ADUs would be permitted in existing permitted, ADUs in existing permitted buildings would be exempt from design review. That's per the state requirement. Exterior modifications to an existing building that increases floor area ratio, however, would have to be architecturally compatible. We have similar standards already that we have in Chapter 30.47, our design review section in our zoning code. A detached ADU in a newly constructed building should not be located between the primary dwelling and the front setback line. So what we're trying to do is, if you already have an existing house or existing garage that may be in the front setback, well, those or in front of the primary house, those could be converted because it would be existing and permitted. But if someone were to come in with a new proposal for an ADU, we would require that new ADU to be set back from the main line of the house, so it wouldn't be essentially in the front of the house. A detached unit would not be able to exceed 15 feet in height, again, except for conversions of a detached garage, which could add us onto the second floor. That's state requirement. Property owners would have to pay all sewer, water, school district, and other applicable fees, just like they do for any construction now of new units. An ADU would not be able to be sold separately from the residential unit. Again, it's accessory dwelling. It's not a primary dwelling. An ADU would not be able to be rented for less than 30 days. That is our proposal. Our concern is that we're concerned about the Airbnb phenomenon. The idea is to have housing for people to stay long-term. That's why we're proposing this. Property owners would be required to either occupy the primary residence or occupy the ADU. That is something the state law allows us to do, and staff is proposing to do that as well. I mean, the goal of the ADU isn't to change the character of the street. So that's why we feel it's necessary to have an on-site owner. Other ADU criteria, we have fire sprinklers that would be required only if they're required in the primary residence. And ADUs would also have to have setbacks sufficient for fire safety. We know there's plenty of houses that have very small setbacks depending on how they're located. We would have the ability always to make sure that we have safe units. Parking. Parking is a big issue. This is really where the state came down with a lot of requirements that don't necessarily go along with things we've done in the past here in Glendale. Garage conversions, they must replace parking for the primary residence. So right now, if you have a typical single-family house where the requirement is 2 parking spaces, if you convert your garage, you would still need to provide 2 parking spaces on site. We're also proposing that an ADU would have to provide 1 parking space on site, but there are exceptions. Replacement parking for your primary residence and parking for the ADU may be unenclosed. It may be in driveways or within setback areas. Currently, right now, we don't allow that. We require parking to be fully enclosed. Each uncovered parking space, we've identified a minimum width of 8 feet and a length of 18 feet. That is consistent with our non-conforming standards that we have for parking spaces, realizing that many of the driveways and things we have in the city existing in single-family areas don't meet current code. They are smaller, so our goal was to be consistent with our non-conforming section. Spaces may be tandem, and also a driveway for an accessory dwelling unit must be the same driveway as the one used for the primary residence, except if the residence front backs onto an alley, in which case the alley could be used as an access to the accessory dwelling unit. Now here's some of the statements or regulations that the state has provided. They've identified when no accessory dwelling unit parking is required. If a property is within 1/2 mile of a transit stop, we cannot require it. If a property is historic or in a historic district and is a contributing building or structure, we are proposing that in that case they not be required to have additional parking out of concern to make sure that we're not affecting the historic nature of the property. When accessory dwelling unit is located within the existing primary residence or guest house. So we have a lot of instances where you may have a house that doesn't meet the current code. It might be over FAR. They can still have an accessory dwelling unit within the dwelling they already have. When on-street parking permits are required but not offered to the occupant of an ADU, we're not allowed to require parking. When within 1 block of a car share lot, we're not allowed to require parking.
Just so we're clear, Laura, these 5 bullet points are all required by state law, so we can't require
Yes.
parking in these exceptions. Maybe the second bullet point, we added a little nuance to it, but they're all in the state law, and we're just implementing them in our ordinance.
Yeah. Under our ADU ordinance proposal, we're also requiring anybody who is building an ADU to get a permit for that ADU. We want to make sure that part of the reason we have an ADU is just to make process is just to make sure that it is reviewed by staff. And it doesn't just go directly into a building permit process. We want it to come through planning so we can look at our zoning codes and look at the design and make sure that they actually are implementing this criteria. And again, if the criteria is met, we will issue a permit. The ADU permit would run with the land, and it would require recordation of a covenant and agreement that provides notice to future owners, as well as to staff. When we look through them, we will know that the unit exists. And we would also know what criteria that unit was approved under in case things change in the future. So we have a recommendation. Staff recommends that council adopt the interim ordinance establishing development standards and procedures for ministerial approval of ADUs. Staff recommends that council initiate zoning code amendments related to ADUs for a permanent ordinance. And that concludes staff's recommendations. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I'm going to take questions, and then we'll do public comments. Any questions from?
Let's hear from you.
Okay. Would you like to hear from the public, shall we?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead. Mr. Snoddy?
What was the state's stated intent for this new rule? What's the goal that they're trying to accomplish by AB 2299 and SB 1069?
Their stated intent was that there's a housing crisis, an affordable housing crisis in California. And so they felt it was a state need to have additional units being built and being built quickly. And for this reason, they've adopted their standards. We actually do have in the ordinance a bunch of whereases in the front of our ordinance. We've outlined in that exactly what the state has the state purpose is.
And I'm saying, and I ask that question so that our residents can hear what the answer is, because some of the emails that we received in response to this item being on the agenda, I tend to think that they're under the misimpression that somehow this is our initiative, or we really have much leeway as to whether we want to adopt this ordinance or not, or some type of an ordinance that enables us to at least manage the process.
I mean, I can tell you we've successfully avoided accessory dwelling units. We've had 3 different housing elements that have come through since 1996 when this was adopted. Every single one of those that came through, we spent a lot of time documenting the fact that we didn't think we needed them because we had adequate affordable housing in the city of Glendale, that our standards allowed adequate use of property and we weren't being exclusive. There was quite a lot of work that's been done. I can tell you I spent hours with HCD arguing this, and we were successful up until now. Our state law has changed.
And I think you hit on the other point. Not only are we addressing the housing supply, but also affordability.
Sure.
And that's important.
Because
Okay.
I think realistically speaking, a lot of these types of units will end up being used by either the seniors in the household or the younger people in the household that don't necessarily want to go out there and don't have the means to pay for a separate.
And I would also point out that ADUs can be rented by anyone. They're not restricted to the household, just like accessory dwelling units are, guest houses are, but ADUs are not.
Right.
Okay, we'll hear from the public. First, Dora Beal, and then Mike Mohill.
Good evening, Mayor Devine and council members and staff.
State your name, please.
My name is Adora Beal. I am the president of the Glendale Association of Realtors, and I am speaking on behalf of the association this evening. As realtors, we are acutely aware of the housing shortage faced throughout the state. Too many good people are unable to buy a home or rent an affordable unit. The new state law and the city's corresponding ordinance will help us provide additional housing without greatly burdening our neighborhoods. We have a few concerns with the proposal as drafted. The first deals with enforcement. It requires that the homeowner live on site, either in the primary or accessory unit. We would like to know how that will be enforced. Next, will the covenant required of the owner living on site run with the property and be transferred on sale? And I believe we spoke to that. But what if the owner or the future owner ignores that covenant? How will you know if the owner is not living on site? The second concern is about continuing to protect the look and character of our historic districts. In the proposal, ADUs must be built behind the primary unit and out of sight. But that really doesn't protect the look of our historic districts, as an ADU might be built in a style not in keeping with the primary home. How will you protect against this? We stand ready to help with feedback as staff writes the permanent ordinance. We are in your neighborhood every day. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening.
I might mention that Adora is president of Glendale Association of Realtors.
She stated it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I have a quick question, Adora. Is the association for or against the covenant?
The covenant of running with the land?
Yes.
I don't
know the
have a comment
enforcement
on
is
that.
something different. That's the city issue that we have to enforce it and figure out a way to enforce it. But is the association for or against the covenant?
I'm not sure that we have a position to state on that this evening. However, I would say that the enforcement piece of it is key. You know, you can have one that runs with the land, but if you can't really enforce it, how good is it?
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike Mohill? Go ahead.
On the issue of the covenant, city attorney, the purpose it would serve would be for notice to a bona fide purchaser?
Correct.
Yeah, because as far as the city's concerned, the ordinance is the ordinance, state law is state law. We're going to enforce it.
Right, but it's to provide the owner notice that this covenant that the owner occupied is part of the restriction on the property.
And if they do their due diligence, they would find that out.
Correct.
Pretty quickly okay. Mr. Mohill, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Devine. I have a few questions on this item. This so-called housing shortage in the state of California, it was caused by government regulations and rules. Up and down EPA, you raise electric rates, you raise water rates beyond the cost of delivery, and you make it impossible for the folks who have to pay the bills to live in our cities. Government created this problem, not the people. California's a great state, but it's a high cost of living because of what government created. Now, the other question we know we have about 4,000 units, apartments in the DSP, downtown Glendale. Would those units be considered new units rather than creating more units throughout the city and all the other units that are going on outside of the DSP? Will these units eventually become rental units for the homeowner? The owner should live within the main building. This situation will increase the population density in neighborhoods, create more traffic and more congestion. It's possible crime. A new look of the neighborhoods will happen. A granny house there, a granny house there. We'll have a hodgepodge of dwellings throughout the city. I don't think the people who thought of this idea were looking beyond you-know-where. What's wrong with these 4,000 units? We already have 4,000 new units in Glendale. You've approved them all. And we're just waiting for more traffic in downtown Glendale, aren't we? And outside of the DSP zone. We got the over there on Broadway and Pacific. There's that great unit going up. We got the Camden units. We got the Brio units. We got thousands of new units already in the city. Why do we need to bring in new units and more? We have plenty of congestion right now. Ask anybody who lives in the city for more than in the last 10 years. They don't want to travel in Glendale anymore. They're looking to leave, to escape. I'm a 60-year resident, and I've seen the change. I don't think, again, government created the shortage of housing, and now government wants the people who pay the bills to foot the bill, too. Thank you.
I just wanted to remind Mr. Mulhill that the reason that this is state law, so we don't have much of a choice except to write our own ordinance, and it is for affordable housing. All those 4,000 units that we have are not all affordable housing, and that's exactly the crisis that we're dealing with right now. And I think this is what they figure is one way of addressing that. Myrna Stanley.
Good evening, Mayor Devine and council members. Myrna Stanley, Verdugo Woodlands Homeowners Association. Mr. Ochoa, thank you for your comments regarding what seems to be more frequent contests between the state and our local cities and counties about local control, but we're stuck with it, as you mentioned. This is obviously going to add to the density of our residential neighborhoods and increase the on-street parking, which neither one of those are wonderful things. I would ask that when you refer this to the Planning Commission, that you ask them to specifically look at the parking, that the on-site parking, it doesn't have to be paved necessarily. It could be pebble or grasscrete, but that it be accessed by the main driveway of the residents, and to specifically look at our hillside, Adams Hill, and we all know what Oakmont 4 looks like. You can see it from the freeway, from Cañada, from wherever. And I cannot imagine those flag lots on hillsides with another living quarters. I don't understand that. So if there's any way we can have more stringent application of this on the hillside properties especially, we'd sure appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Myrna. Grant Michaels, followed by Catherine Yurka.
Good evening, Council. My name is Grant Michaels. I'm the president of the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council. The neighborhoods and the Coordinated Council have an obvious interest in this issue. We do understand the intent, but we have concerns about the implementation, as many have expressed, and I expect others will continue to express. We have more questions than we do comments, such as with the conversion of a garage. If currently a two-car garage is required and that garage is converted, is a new garage required to be built? Or would parking on a driveway meet the ordinance, essentially changing what we have fought for with the design review process? We have questions about the historic character, and we will be following this issue as the interim ordinance is adopted, hoping to work with staff as a final ordinance is revised. I would like to suggest that this is an issue that the Planning Task Force would be able to address and comment on. I was pleased to know that the task force was to be reformed by the end of January. We have been contacted, but we still are waiting for that task force to reform. Thank you.
Followed by Catherine Yurka, followed by Bill Weissman.
Good evening, Mayor Devine and members of City Council. My name is Kathy Yurka, and I'm here on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society. I primarily want to commend staff for the ordinance and the staff report. This law is extremely sticky and ambiguous, and the guidelines are hard to parse from the state, so I really thought that they did an excellent job with the interim ordinance. I'm very pleased at the effort, or I, on behalf of the organization, am very pleased at the effort to preserve historic resources and the character of older neighborhoods more generally. TGHS is not opposed to the creation of ADUs. However, like most of the community, we're alarmed at the absence of design review, but we understand that it will take an amendment of the state law to change that. We do hope that as the final version of the ordinance moves forward, that staff, the Planning Commission, and Council will consider requiring that new construction ADUs be out of the public view throughout historic districts and not just on contributing properties. As Jay Platt has said over and over again, it's the district, the historic district, that is the historic resource. And the ability to throw up second stories on garages and make other very, very visible changes would really impact the coherence of the neighborhood of the historic district as a whole. I was also concerned about the owner occupancy requirement and how that would be enforced as well, because it seems a bit mystifying to me. But other than that, I just look forward to seeing how this process moves forward. And thank you, guys.
Thank you, Catherine. Bill Weissman, followed by Frank Gallo.
Good evening, Mayor Devine, City Council members, City staff, and the public. My name is Bill Weissman from far north Glendale. And just have a quick question with regards to this issue. There are some of my neighbors have covenants attached to their properties that forbid construction of a second story on their house. In fact, one of my neighbors successfully sued another neighbor, and the court found in the neighbor's favor because of that existing covenant. My question is, does the new state law trump those covenants in terms of being able to build an ADU on top of a garage, which is adding a second story? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia, do you have an answer for that?
Sure. Generally, a local ordinance would not trump a private party covenant between two parties.
How about a state law?
No, and a state law wouldn't either. I mean, this state law doesn't. This state law doesn't say any private covenants that restrict construction are prohibited. It controls what we do, not what private properties agree to. Private property owners agree to.
That means that any resident, upon selling their property, could insist on sell it with a covenant, and thereby preclude the buyer from.
They could. I mean, I would suspect they would only do that if they're getting some consideration for it. But yeah, it's always an option.
They're so concerned about the historicity of our city and concerned about the look of the city and so on.
That's an option, yes.
Mr. Gallo?
The spirit of the state law is basically four things as I have read it. Increase the number of small dwellings available in town for rent. Increase the range of choices of housing accommodation. Encourage greater diversity of population with particular attention to young adults and senior citizens. And encourage a more economic and energy efficient use of town housing supply while maintaining the appearance and character of the town's single-family neighborhoods. The interim ordinance submitted to Council addresses most of those issues, but fails to give adequate consideration to senior citizen housing, especially those with in-home care needs, or those people who have grown-up kids that are coming back to their parents' home with kids themselves. By restricting the living area to 500 square feet, it's just a little bit more than a two-car garage, and asking to have separate kitchen and bathroom areas, basically there is no room to accommodate a live-in caregiver or a returning child with a kid themselves. Certainly, there is a need to curtail the uncontrolled increase in population density, but the issue is already properly addressed by the floor area ratio by limiting the area built on the lot. In a city where a large number of residents are upset about the proliferation of large apartment units and where low-income housing is inadequate, ADUs can be a viable solution. They address affordable housing needs by making efficient use of existing infrastructure. As President of Glendale Coalition for Better Government, we urge you that you, as council members, representing a population group where the concept of extended family is a core value, take into consideration the needs of those for whom the units are intended and make the appropriate changes so that the limit is based on the floor area ratio so that these people can have a caregiver or kids if that's the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Gardis? I'm sorry, I don't. G-A-R, I'm having R.
It's all right. I wrote that in a hurry, and I have terrible writing. Hello. Hi, it's Mike Van Gorder. I just wanted...
Mike what?
Mike Van Gorder.
Oh, okay.
Is it that bad? I'm sorry.
I'm terribly
it was
sorry.
written in haste because I thought I'd be the only one coming out in favor of this ordinance, but apparently not. It's nice to hear the town coming out in favor. The 4,000 new units, the Altea, the Camden, all those luxury apartments that are being built up there, young people, seniors can't afford them, just straight out like that. I believe the Altea or the one on Central has units going for $2,500 for 700 square feet to rent. That's not an affordable living situation. The proposal of the ADU is inefficient use of existing space. It's something that someone, maybe not even a member of their own family, which is to say a senior, obviously a senior or someone's kid, that could be a huge benefit. But there are a lot of people who want to move to Glendale and who can't afford present pricing. So this would be a really good opportunity to do exactly that. We're looking at a third, I think at least a third of Glendale renters who are being cost burdened, which is to say they can barely make their rent. So this is one very modest step towards better housing solutions. And I would urge, in addition to any RSO on the table or affordable housing initiatives or senior housing initiatives that the council might be proposing coming up here, to approve something like this coming through, because we need more space in Glendale in efficient use, and as well as being a possible source of income for some of these homeowners would be a really, really wise decision. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the cards, public comments, and so I'll open it up to my colleagues for comments. Who would like to begin?
Well, I have a couple questions. Maybe Laura can help. What do you do if you have a Mills Act home? Can you put an accessory dwelling unit in a Mills Act home?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I would say no, you shouldn't be able to. But I know that's a decision that you'll probably make. I mean, I think the point of the Mills Act was to preserve the integrity of every aspect of the home.
I would just say from a legal perspective that might be something you can do, but we'd have to look at it a little bit more closely.
How about the parks and library impact fees? Would these have to be, are they subject to those fees?
Yes.
Yeah, we're treating them as a new unit.
As a new unit, okay. My next question is about, we were talking about covenants. There are many neighborhoods with CC&Rs that say that there shall only be one dwelling unit on each lot. So are you saying that if you happen to live in an area where that type of CC&R is recorded, that the ADU could not be built?
Without members of council, without certainly if the law was just written generally, then the private covenant would control. So if the private CC&R said you can't have more than one unit on a lot, that would control. Whether the city has the legislative authority to basically override that, I don't know. That would be something we'd have to look at. But as it stands now, if this were adopted, for example, and there was a HOA that had binding CC&Rs that said you can only have one unit per lot, I would think that would control. But again, that would then be for the private parties to work out. That wouldn't be for a decision for the city attorney to weigh in on.
Okay. And then my comments, Madam Mayor. I do have mixed feelings about this. We have to take some action. The state has usurped our authority at local control. Yes, it will obviously bring in more housing units. I'm hoping that these housing units would be more of the affordable type. I think that's the intention of the legislation, to make them affordable. I am, though, concerned about the parking impacts that will be felt. I know that even though perhaps a long driveway may have adequate parking, the 18 feet by 8 feet, in theory, I think, but not in practice. In practice, people are going to park out on the street, and especially if you're within a half mile of a transit line. I mean, we've got B-lines. If you did a map, I'm sure most of the city of Glendale would be covered by that exempt zone. But it is what it is. We can't really take any other action. It's the state coming in. Part of me says resist with all this resistance that's going on lately, but perhaps this isn't the fight to use that resistance. But I think I think your work was well done. The 500 square feet, how did you come about that? Give us your thoughts on how that number came to be about.
Yeah, our thoughts on the 500 square feet is we already allow those for accessory dwelling units, or accessory living quarters.
Which
now
is
I
a
have
guest
a
house.
new term I have to remember. Guest houses. And our thought was, first off, we know we have them throughout the city. They exist. And we thought that's been our standard for a long time. We already know we have a lot of people that have family members and things that already live on site, and those we thought, well, it makes sense to allow a new accessory dwelling unit to have that same modest size, and it is modest. Part of the reason we were concerned about having a bigger unit, because the state does allow an ADU to go up to 1,200 square feet or up to 50% of the size of an existing house that's on property. Our concern with that is, again, you would have bigger households moving into those. And I understand we do have a need for affordable housing, but we're trying to find a balance. How do you allow ADUs to occur? How do you have a reasonable dwelling size and still avoid some of the parking impacts and other negative effects? And our thought was, well, you allow them, but you just keep it a modest size. And that way, a small household could live in there. But again, it would be a small household. And so for the interim ordinance, we said, let's put that in. And then we would vet it with the public to see if there was interest in having a larger dwelling unit. And as in terms of parking, one of the other issues we were looking at is fire safety and access. One of the other things we're looking at is just roadway widths and access to units. We have many streets developed with single-family homes that have access that's difficult for fire trucks. So we're looking perhaps at having some sort of a street width, paving width. We're looking at 28 feet as a paving width. 28 feet would allow parking on one side of the street and a fire truck to go through. So that's one of the things we'd be looking at, but we had to turn this around quickly. We were very concerned that we have no standards right now other than state standards, and they do not reflect our local zoning laws or even our desire. So we thought, let's get something on the books. Let's get something now that we think would work, and then we can fine-tune it when we go through meeting with the public and going through the hearing process.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that 28 feet? What was that again?
We're looking at 28 feet of paving. You have standard street parking is 8 feet wide on one if you have it on one side of the street, and then the fire trucks desire 20 feet of clear paving width for them to drive by. So one of the only things that we're allowed some discretion from the state is fire access. And we thought, all right, we have fire access not only on the individual lots to make sure that we have safe access to the ADU as well as the primary unit. We also have fire access concerns, especially with our hillsides and the narrow streets we have on areas like some of the streets on Adams Hill, very narrow. We already have parking issues there. We already have fire access issues in certain times. So we thought, okay, it makes sense to keep the unit small, reduce the number of cars that could be using that ADU, and then also think in the long term, how are we going to deal with this parking and how are we going to deal with fire access? Maybe we might look at restricting new ADUs on streets that have less than 28 feet of parking or width of the street.
And that would also be helpful in the hillsides.
Absolutely.
Adams Hill and the hillsides in Glendale. So that's, I think, a good direction to go.
But I really don't understand what would change, because if you have an existing house on that lot today, even let's say, I don't know, Northwest Glendale or flat areas or Adams Hills, if you have an existing house and the owner can also park on the street, as you know, in Adams Hills, many of the owners don't even park in their garage, they park on the street. So the accessibility of fire trucks, the issue is there today. It has to be accessible. I don't think adding a unit, maybe you may have 2 more cars parked on the street, but the width and the accessibility will not change.
I think our issue is that if I do it and Laura does it and you do it because we all can, then that number starts to grow to an unmanageable degree. To the extent this is an interim ordinance, I think that the guiding principle for us as staff and recommending to you is first do no harm. So to the extent that we're looking at 500 feet, well, we know what the 500 feet looks like. To the extent that we are looking at parking standards, we kind of know how that looks and feels, understanding that as we go through a larger and a permanent, if you will, ordinance for this, that the public's going to weigh in, you'll give more consideration to it, because as I said at the beginning, the council is at this interesting crossroads. I think this council, more than certainly previous councils, has been focused on the need for affordable housing, and that is a real and pressing need that is just a function of the popularity of California. Not necessarily something that any government has done, certainly, but to the extent that people want to be here, and this is an attractive and safe community, so people want to be here, specifically in Glendale. So to the extent that we want to see generations of Glendalians be able to live here, that's great. That is a laudable goal, but we always talk about where you stand depends on where you sit. And if in your neighborhood or my neighborhood or anyone else's neighborhood, everyone starts to move forward with this proliferation of ADUs, on the one hand, that's great that we can maximize the value of our property potentially, help alleviate the affordable housing concerns potentially. but at the same time, you could be changing the character of a neighborhood. And so to the extent, again, this is an interim, we're saying let's go slowly while we figure this out, because I think a couple of speakers have mentioned it. There are a number of ill-defined terms of this state law, and I would venture a guess that some of those ill-defined terms will begin to be defined by follow-up legislation. I don't know that we would recommend to you to be at that bleeding edge of this particular issue, considering how many different ways it cuts.
I have a few questions on here. On the sprinkler issue, I understand you said that if the house doesn't require it, the second dwelling unit will not require it either. But on the other hand, when you build a new garage today, even if your house doesn't have a sprinkler, you have to add sprinklers to your garage. Am I correct or not? Am I right?
I don't know the building code, so.
I'm not sure you do.
I'm
not sure you do.
I think that if you're changing the occupancy of the garage, so you would. And I think the requirement that the sprinklers not be required if it's not required in the main house, that applies for the units that are either attached to the existing dwelling unit or an existing accessory structure that's been converted. For new construction, a new detached dwelling, I think you can require sprinklers.
Okay. Also, I understand that the ordinance says the second dwelling unit has to be in the back, in the rear of the property, just to keep the compatibility of the neighborhood intact and go from there, which is the right thing. And I think the issue that was brought up as far as historic districts go is a very valid issue. I mean, we have to make sure that if there is a second unit being built in a contributor, has to match the existing house or to comply with it a little bit, not to put just a box in the back. But my second question is, what if you have a house already and it's in the front, it's a small house, it's compatible with your neighborhood, and you have a big lot? Can you keep that as a second? I think that's what I'm asking, to maybe look into that as well. Can you keep that as a second unit and build a house in the back?
Well, this time we would have to look into that.
Because if you want to look at the compatibility, it will be still compatible because the house that is existing there, it's part of that neighborhood anyways. So that's something that I think we need to look into. Also, what is the minimum size of our residential units that we require when you want to build an apartment building or a condominium project?
What's the minimum size of the unit? I believe for apartments and condos, I think our minimum size is 600 square feet. But again, this is single-family homes, and this would be an ADU. It would not be an apartment. It's an ADU. It's actually a different standard under the state law. And so that's why we're proposing 500 square feet, because it's closer to what we allow for a guest house.
Yeah, but the issue that I have is you're not comparing apples to apples. A guest house is not a living quarters. It's not a place that you live every day. Guest house is where guest house or granny come in and stays there for a while and lives, or your kids use it, or what have you. It's a billiard room or what have you. But this is going to be a living quarter that you can rent, and the size is 100 square feet smaller than the minimum standard that we have. So I'm not really I'm not okay with this 500 square foot because when you add a bathroom, as it was indicated, a hallway and a kitchen in there, and a small 10 by 10 bedroom, there is nothing left as a living space. That's not a good quality of life. I think that's something that we're forgetting sometimes. Just to try to add more units is a quality of life. So I won't be supporting that 500 square foot. I think minimum it has to be 800 square feet. State law allows 1,200 square feet. In some areas it's larger than the existing homes that we have in the neighborhood, but I think 850 square feet would be something that I would support. Also, the interim ordinance, whatever we pass today, if you want to make changes to it, because Mr. Ocha, maybe you can answer that, or Mr. Garcia can answer it. If you pass this ordinance today with modifications or what have you,
And what is the timeline on this ordinance? Because this is an interim ordinance. Is it a deadline for it, or how does it work?
By state law, Councilmember Garpetian, an interim ordinance or ordinance adopted under the particular statute we're adopting it is in effect for 45 days. So if it's adopted, and tonight would be introduction, and then next week would be adoption. If it is adopted, it would take, and I was thinking about this, it would take 4 votes to be adopted, and then we're proposing this as an urgency measure. So then from 45 days from there, the ordinance would expire on its own terms unless the council prior to that extends it for a longer period, and it can extend it up to a year, or it can let it expire, or it can extend it for a shorter period of time. But at some point, this expires, and the council has to adopt permanent regulations in the zoning code of the city's municipal code. So this will not become the permanent law. It may be used as the basis to create that permanent law, but it will on its own terms expire at some point.
Okay, so when that expires, what happens to the applications that are coming in before we approve the permanent law?
It'll be up to the council at the time when we come back with the permanent ordinance. We'll have some language addressing that particular scenario, and the council that can decide we either want the prior law to apply or we want the new law to apply. That'll be a policy call for the council at the time.
And hopefully those applicants would also take a measured view of that to say, well, maybe I want to wait before I submit my application to know what the final law is, because I could be leaving value on the table.
Sure. So when this expires and you are trying to create a new ordinance, if the terms are different than this one, do you need still 4 votes to change these terms, or this will go in effect? Because my concern is whatever we approve today, I don't know if it's written in concrete or not.
Nothing is written in concrete. Okay. So and in this particular case, it's not. It is a new ordinance that you'd be coming back and considering at the time it comes before you. It needs 4 votes. I believe it needs 4 votes right now, and the zoning code amendment will also need 4 votes, because that's a requirement of our charter.
Okay, and I think the driveway issue is a huge issue. If you have 4 or 5 cars, 2 families living there, and you have 3, 4, 5 cars parked on that driveway, if the second one wants to leave, guess what? They have to back up 2 to 3 more cars to move one of the cars. And I'm going to go back to my statements few months ago. 2 words for you: circular driveway. That will take care of some of these issues that you have. But I'm going to stop here, Madam Mayor, and give the floor to my colleague.
Councilmember Sinanian.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the state came down with this because I think they're acutely aware of the housing shortage. And despite what people may think, it's very real. It's out there, it's real, it's escalating, it's going to get worse. And perhaps the state feared that local authorities won't have the political courage to do something like this on their own because of the pressures that they receive from local groups, and that's why they're imposing this on us. So, but in any case, it's in front of us. We have to address it. We have to set some parameters, some guidelines that are not really addressed by the legislature. So, one concern that I had was this proposition that property owner required to occupy either primary residence or ADU. And thought is this: some people purchase real estate as an investment, so they buy it not with the intent of living there, but long-term rental. And this provision would make it impossible for anyone who wants to purchase a home as an investment to do so, because then it would require for them to live in one part of the residence, either the primary residence or ADU. I don't think that's it's proper for us to do that. So my proposed solution is to require that either property owner lives there or they rent it, but only rent it as one entity. So this
as one unit.
As one unit, yeah. So this unit that is in reality composed of 2 separate units, for rental purposes, be treated as one unit. I think that takes care of it. People can still look at homes as, they can buy it and they can rent it for 5 years, but they don't have to worry about, well, how do I need to live there now? Just a thought.
Can I make just one comment? I think generally within the framework of the law that works. I think it's permissible. As I was thinking a little bit more about it, the only issue would be just have to make sure the mechanics work out for those folks that already have a lease. So an owner is living in their primary unit, they build the second unit, they rent it out to someone, then they decide they're going to move and rent out the house. How do we deal with that person that's already got a lease? So that's some mechanical issues
Yeah, my proposal wouldn't exclude that. So it's not that wouldn't come at the expense of someone being able to live there and then renting out the ADU.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is that after they've done that, then they decide to move out of their house, and then both the single family, the primary residence and the second unit are being rented out. And I think what you're saying is at that point they can only rent it out together. Correct?
Once they move out.
Once they move out, and that's I think
because again the fear, it's a very well-founded fear, is that single-family home neighborhoods, an entire neighborhood may turn into something other than that. So it's duplex neighborhoods, and that's going to entirely change the character of the neighborhood. I don't think that's the end result that we're looking for. Frankly, I don't think that's what the state is looking for. I really don't think the state is instituting this with the intention of, hey, people have garages, why don't they convert their garages and rent them out? I think they are thinking practically single-family homes, people live there, then they have a kid who comes back from college and he can't afford, or let him live here. Or they have an elderly, they want to be close to them, let them live close by. I think that's the intent. Again, you can say, well, how do you know that? I don't know, common sense. So how do we prevent single-family home neighborhoods turning into duplex neighborhoods? But at the same time, how do we make it possible for people who, as a matter of fact, buy homes for investment purposes to do so?
Therein lies the rub.
That's the rub. I will say the argument to that will be, then just don't let them build a second unit if they're investment property owners. That's one of the answers.
Can we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can say. You can, by virtue of imposing a requirement that they live in one of the units, and they don't become this sort of absentee landlord who has two units that they're not.
Then aren't you limiting sort of the pool of people who can?
Yes, and
engage in the real estate market.
You are, yes.
That's the issue. That consequence. That I mean, you said it very eloquently. If you take all of our R1 neighborhoods, and now they can be R2 neighborhood, or at least they can be a duplex, right? That I think is one half of the fear that you've heard, and then, as you say, the other half is how do you generate housing for all these very obvious examples that we hear about all the time. First, do no harm. That's what we're trying to ferret our way through.
But I understand where you're coming from. We can draft that up. The mechanical part is just dealing with the tenant who in the second unit has moved in already, and then subsequent to that, the owner and occupant of the primary house decides to move out. And how do you enforce that requirement at that point? So if we can do that, then I think that's certainly workable.
And that I think. Yeah, and can I ask you a question though? If you do that, if you rent it, they move out, the owner moves out, and you rent it as one entity, does that disallow the renter to rent the AUD? They cannot rent that. If I go in and I'm going to rent the house,
sub rent, a sublease.
Sublease, yeah. Would they be allowed? Would they be permitted to rent that AUD while they're renting in the house?
We don't have. It's not currently drafted to prevent the sublease. So what I'd like to do is if that ends up being the direction, we'll put this in the revised what gets introduced and brought back to you next week for adoption, and you can look at it and see if it suffices for your purpose.
Okay. A couple of our speakers asked, well, how are we going to enforce this? And it's a good question, but I think the answer is the same way that we enforce it now. It's complaint based, right? We don't do surveys of neighborhoods, and so I mean,
the city with their type of resources might do it, but we would do it on complaint based. It's not a perfect system. I think, as you indicated, legislature knowing that there would be some consternation with this statute try to provide additional protections to local government. This particular one's been in there for a while, but also you have the requirement that they can't be used as vacation rentals. So again, it's a tool to allow, if you want to have that owner-occupant have a requirement, even if it's not going to be enforced except on a complaint-based system, at least you have that tool to address that issue of it not becoming a duplex, an investor-owned duplex.
Okay. One of the speakers asked that we not only look at contributing properties in historic districts, but every property in historic districts is exempt from this. How many historic districts do we have right now?
5, 6?
7.
5, 6, 7. Is it maybe more?
7 is the answer.
Okay. How much of the single-family home, sort of neighborhoods in Glendale does that cover?
How many
right,
dwelling
because
units you mean?
yeah, like how many of the single-family home units are covered?
Or contributors.
No, covered are
maybe,
within.
Maybe 1,200.
So it's minimal. Because the next thing that'll happen is, I think, and it's the logical thing for it to happen, is the interest groups in this city to push for more of the neighborhoods to become historic. Thereby, you're precluding more and more of them being subject to this ordinance. I mean, does at some point how is the state going to enforce against us?
I think the state itself, the tools they will use will be, when we do adopt an ordinance, we have to send it to HCD for review. I don't know what kind of level of review they're actually going to look to it, or if they're going to stick it in a drawer. But when you come back for your housing element approval, I don't know when the next one is, that'll be part of the process. So I want to look at that to see, are we complying? And then the other part of the enforcement will be from property owners challenging cities who don't have an ordinance that complies with the law.
So complaint-based again.
Complaint-based, yeah.
Okay. So because right, again, I mean, we can have our ordinance say every property in historic districts is exempt, but the state doesn't know how many historic districts we have, what percentage of the homes are covered, and so on and so forth. So anyway, complaint-based, that makes sense. My last comment I'll make is the 500 square foot. I just think that number is just really
too small.
It's not realistic. It's too small. I think the 800 square foot is a good starting point, and I understand that this is a starting point. Again, for us, we're in uncharted territory in many ways, and we'll have to see how things go and improve upon it. We may have to improve upon it later on. That's all I have.
Thank you. Well, we have a lot of good comments and good ideas. I just think that I'm going along with Councilmember Sinani, and that the state has good intentions, but we're left to deal with it. We have a city where people want to live here, high desirability, I guess is what I'm trying to say. First comment is about the 500 square feet. That is a room for rent. If we start going up higher to 800 square feet, we're going to be equal to the apartments, and the rents are going to go up and up and up, and then we're going to get out of the affordable housing bracket for these AUDs. And that's my only, this is a room for rent. It's not an apartment like in the, it's kind of like where I started, a room for rent, a room with a kitchen and a bathroom, and that's it. And you pay maybe $800, $900, but not, I think if we start getting up into the 800s, we're right back where we started.
So you're worried that the size of the apartments will result in increase in rent? But I mean, we have 450 square foot apartments in those very buildings that are going for $1,500, $1,600. So that argument.
Well, I think that if someone is allowed to build an 800 or 900 square foot AUD, they're gonna want $1,500 for that unit. That's not affordable housing.
The concern that I've heard you say during briefing is, if it becomes an attractive enough economic incentive, then everyone will in fact do it, right? And that's the issue. Now, maybe the council wants to allow that economic incentive, but again, the devil's in the details. There's a lot of consequence to consider, and that's why I'll say it the last time. On the interim ordinance, from staff's perspective, we would always start lower and allow the council, as you make policy, to push it north of that number. So,
I don't think that's the intent to have homeowners make more money on their properties, although it is a result of this particular policy. I think staff did a great job in drafting this emergency ordinance. I do like the idea of the survey that we're doing on the street widths so that it gives us a lot of good information, and I think that's a good basis for supporting an AUD in a certain area. I understand that they can demolish their garages and put up AUDs. That is permitted to demolish. And then someone asked about the...
Just maybe we should just provide clarification on
okay.
that. If a garage that has the code required parking is demolished, the city can require that that parking be replaced on site, but it cannot require that that parking, if it was covered, be covered or put in a carport. In other words, it can be on a driveway, an existing driveway, that's whether it's tandem or not. So we can require that parking in an existing driveway, but you can't require them to build a new garage if they tear down the one they're built for the ADU. That's in the statute.
And they have to have one space per AUD.
It is, the statute says one parking space per unit or per bedroom. I think with... It's one space per unit, or the statute says one per unit or per bedroom. And I think the staff
Our proposal is one per unit.
One per unit, given that it was a 500 square foot unit. The council may want to consider, it's up to you, if it's a higher maximum square footage, whether you want to do it per bedroom or not, because as you get up to the 800, maybe that can be a 2-bedroom, I don't know, but that's something to think about.
So my question is, if we allow that to go up to 800 square feet, and we're also requiring them to have parking, are they going to have larger driveways? I mean, how do we handle that parking, that absolutely having to have parking on site? That's, I think, going to be an issue.
Well, the way the ordinance is written is we want them to use the existing driveways. However, we do have our regular zoning code, which does limit the size amount of paving you can have on the front of your house. We also have lot coverage requirements, so we'd want to make sure that we still have landscape in our lot coverage that we have in our existing ordinance. Those would remain, our existing zoning standards for that. We would have no changes. Okay. Same thing with the setbacks, with the one exception for setbacks for a garage.
So the landscaping is still going to
Yes.
stay the same, 52% has to be landscaping?
52% in the front, yes.
While we're on the issue of the garages, let me ask a question. Currently, are garages included in the FARs?
No, because they're not living area, but accessory living quarters are.
So
your guest house is included.
Yeah, these garages are converted. Guest houses are included in the FAR.
Guest houses included are right now.
Garages aren't. So
they're not.
If these garages are going to be allowed to be used as ADUs, then all of a sudden the FAR balance is going to be messed up.
It could be that would be one of the things that we would be looking for when somebody comes in, because we're not proposing any changes to the FAR right now. So we would be looking at what the existing square footage is on the building when somebody comes in to propose an ADU.
Would that, I mean, I'm trying to think, would that really nullify anyone's attempt to even go forward with this?
To the extent you have, and that's one of the things that we would look at when we bring back the ordinance. So the staff's actually looking at how many properties are built out. So if you have a property that's built out in terms of FAR, then yeah, it would if you applied the FAR across the board. And it's just because we had to bring this to you as quickly as possible, right. It's hard for us to say how many will that affect. How many properties will that affect?
Right. We need to have that information, because otherwise it seems like we're...
I mean, the sense is that you'll have a number of properties that can't do this because they're not built to the max FAR.
But you also have a number that would be able to do it, and probably in a number of neighborhoods where you're going to hear it the loudest. I'm thinking Northwest. I'm thinking Verdugo Woodland. I'm thinking some of the neighborhoods that you all, that we live in, that you all have constituents in. And so that's the thing. Your point's very well taken by way of looking at the FAR and the parking. And so, you guys get to make the policy.
Okay.
I'm not sure what to do with that, because that may have no impact or little impact or drastic impact on the
We'll have a
effect
drastic
of this.
impact, if I may, Madam Mayor. Look, there is an intent behind this ordinance. The intent is to create more housing, livable, quality, affordable housing. If you have an 800 square foot unit and I can rent it for $1,500, and my rent in South Glendale right now for a one-bedroom is $1,700, guess what? It's very appealing to me. So the parking is going to be an issue. Any way you skin this cat, the parking will be an issue because most of these homes, especially in South Glendale, they're close to the transit. Show me a home that is not close to a bus stop. Most of the residential neighborhoods, they have bus stops in there. So they can be exempt because they're close to a bus stop. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's the way it is. So this ordinance is not, I think the way this ordinance is being proposed is to discourage doing anything. Because 500 square feet, who wants to put a 500 square foot rental unit when the living space is going to be a 10 by 10 or 20 by 10? Also, the FAR issue, if you want to enforce the FAR issue and not allow it, I promise you over 65% of the homes may not qualify for that. And one other thing I want to mention is people who buy single-family houses, including me, they want privacy. They want to have an easy life. They don't want to have a tenant in their backyard. I don't want to have a tenant in my backyard. If I build a unit in my backyard, it will be either for my mom or for my child. That's it. So some people may take advantage of the situation and build something and lease it. But believe me, with the cost of construction today, that $1,500 won't even pay the cost of the building that property. So I think we need to look at it in a different lens and see if we want to encourage more housing or not. If that's the answer is no, then this ordinance is not even necessary. I know we have to provide some kind of an ordinance because of the state mandate, but I was asking you about the carports because nobody has to provide garages anymore. If they demolish their garage, they don't have to have a covered two-car garage. And that is a huge issue to me overall. But that's the law. So if you want to build a carport at least to have some sort of a protection for your cars, then you cannot build it because the laws that it applies to the detached garage does not apply to a carport that acts like a garage. So that's another thing I think we need to look into for this ordinance because right now if you want to build a detached garage and you're 5 feet away from your property, you can be on the property line. Most of the old homes in my neighborhood, they have garages on the property line. And if you want to build a carport, you cannot. So I think in order to provide more and more parking and places that people will park instead of parking on the street, we have to make it a little bit easier for them to use their driveways. And again, I think the circular driveway is another issue we have to look into. If you want to, I'm not.
It goes back to the circular driveway.
It does, yeah. Well, I want to bring it back to the historic neighborhoods and to that I'm for the non-contributor homes being put into this ordinance that if they want to build an AUD, it has to be in the back, and it has to go for a permit. When it does, the planning has to look at it and make sure it's compatible with the home, not just the contributor homes. I think that's probably been mentioned already. All in all, I think what we're doing tonight is just trying to adopt an emergency ordinance that will get us through this period of time, and we can look at this once you look at it again and bring it back next week. Am I correct, Mr. Ochoa?
Well, yes, ma'am. To the extent that you have the opportunity to take another bite at this, and to Mr. Garpetian's point, to be very clear, the staff approach to this was very conservative because the law is so ill-defined and because this is the latest in a long line of state of California telling local cities that they know best because they have a consultant that told them so. So to the extent that our initial position here was very conservative, that is exactly what this reflects. And the council, again, you know the community better than we. So that is, just to make sure you pull back the curtain, yeah, this is intended to be very conservative approach.
So with that, Mr.
Well, I
Councilmember
agree with you.
Najarian.
I agree with you, Madam Mayor. I understand there are some issues regarding the FAR, regarding the parking, regarding the size of the ADU. But I think the important thing is that we act now, because if we do not act now, then we have no restrictions, and it is a ministerial function. That means anyone that submits something wild and crazy would have to have it approved. We are bound to have it approved. So I suggest let's put what we
Can
have
I ask
in.
a question about that? I understand this went into effect. This went into effect January 1st of this year, and we had no notice of this because now we're being told like, accept this right now, sign on to it, or otherwise it's going to be the end of the world. So when this became effective January 1st, how much notice did we have about this? Why didn't this come in front of us earlier, so that we didn't have this gap where there's nothing in place?
We had two different ordinances that were proposed, or actually not ordinances, state laws. We had AB 2299 and SB 1069. They were both proposed at the same time, and they were actually both signed into law the exact same day. Well, the provisions in those laws, when you read them, one was dependent on the other, which one was enacted first, so you would know which one was actually effective. Well, the biggest deal that we had is that on, I believe it was AB 2299, it really depended which section was applicable. Because if it was Section 1, then we had it was essentially the one that actually was enacted. We didn't have a lot of discretion. We have to allow these. But the other section did allow us to continue to prohibit second units. So we didn't, until we knew which one was actually adopted or how it was going to be codified, we didn't know which one to apply. So we got direction from the state, which actually came out mid-December, then we started preparing for this.
Yeah, so they in essence, they adopted the statutes at the same time, but they wrote in there, if this one's adopted first, then this part of it controls, and if this one's adopted first, this one's controlled. But they were both adopted on the same day, so we couldn't figure it out at our level which one was going to take effect. It wasn't until the state ACD came down with the clarification that this is going to happen, then we started working on it. In terms of the provision that preempted our ban, that's when we figured it out, and it was adopted at the end of the year last year anyway. And
to the extent that the prohibition has been in place here in Glendale since mid-'90s?
Yeah, 1996.
To the extent that we are recommending to you a very conservative opening gambit by way of this interim ordinance, it really is consistent with where councils have been for 20 years. So to the extent that this is getting something on the books that you will certainly change at some point, and that hopefully the state will further refine at some point, this is as best we can do to continue the status quo. If we have misread that somehow, that's okay too. Again, the council gets to make those decisions.
Let me ask this question again. So if this is introduced tonight, it will be approved next week. It takes 30 days to take effect?
We are proposing it as an urgency ordinance, so it would take effect immediately.
Like next week?
Next week.
So what happens if somebody walks in tomorrow and wants to build a second unit? What are the rights that they have? What can they build with whatever we have in our books? Do they have to follow the state's mandate and they can build something like that tomorrow? So propose something like that tomorrow, or how does it work?
So somebody comes in with an application and we haven't formally received one because we've been explaining to folks that this is on the council's calendar. Then the city has 120 days to approve that in accordance with whatever ministerial standards we've put in place. If we don't have them, then at that point the state law takes effect.
Okay, so we don't have to rush into this ordinance tonight, because even if this is delayed for 2 weeks, for example, any application you receive, you have 120 days to say yes or no. Am I correct?
Correct.
And then, one second.
Right.
1 second. No, because if this is delayed, and we'll move this ordinance next week, let's say, so we take a vote on it the following week, so it's 2 weeks, and it's an urgency ordinance. Within these 2 weeks, if you have applications, you have 120 days. The city has 120 days to respond to it. Am I correct?
correct?
Okay, so there is no urgency to rush this thing tonight, because if not, tomorrow hell is going to break loose, and we're going to have 500 applications, and they all want to be 5,000 square foot units in the back. That's what I'm doing, yes.
No. I don't think someone who puts an application in can't be bound by a rule that we pass in 2 weeks.
Well, they could.
They're bound by
if
the
I may,
application as it's received.
they could. Our sense of urgency is to have something on the books, so we're judging them in accordance with the standard that the council has duly adopted, and not sort of holding it in abeyance until you adopt something. It is, if you want to take some additional time, I think there's some risk, but I think we wanted to have something on the books.
Because I don't think I'm ready. I had a briefing on this this afternoon, and this is so much material for me to understand and digest. And even if you move it tonight and you have an application tomorrow, nothing is going to change. We don't have the ordinance approved yet, so I want to take a little time to see which way I want to go on this.
If I may ask another question, you already have people that are coming in that know about this law, that are asking to have extensions made on they're asking to have their garages expanded, right?
Yes,
Am I
we
right?
do. They're coming in right now.
So they already know about the law, and they're already coming in.
Do a moratorium on this?
No, when did this pass? When did this law pass?
At the end of last year.
Okay, they had end of last year. They had the entire month. How many applications have you received?
We've not received any. We've received
I rest
inquiries.
my case. They had 1 month.
The applications that have come in have been applications to building and safety for building permits for garage additions. So we know that they're preparing for this. I mean, people have told us that, okay, we'll come in and get our garage addition. I mean, so we know that they're definitely out there, but nobody's actually come in for an ADU permit.
And I think that's a function of they want to know what the council's going to do, right? Okay. And so to the extent that, as Mike has indicated, that we want to give the best, clearest direction to those customers, it would be that the council is taking this action. Now, obviously, if you're not ready to take this particular action, that's all well and good. Understanding that some folks may end up in limbo if you decide later on, now we want to be more restrictive or we want to be less restrictive. But the idea that for 20 years this has been prohibited, to the extent now that the law may be further defined going forward, before we jump in with both feet, do we want to inch our way in?
So let me address that. This is going to require 4 votes.
As an urgency.
Assuming this gets introduced today, next Tuesday it's going to be as an urgency require 4 votes. I would rather we concentrate on the language of this temporary urgent ordinance and make it such that on Tuesday we can actually pass it with 4 votes, then say, okay, let's move forward with the language as it is and have a clear indication that there are not going to be 4 votes on Tuesday. That means that we'll have a wasted week on top of whatever other weeks it's going to require to actually get it to a point where 4 votes can be had. Just my thoughts.
If I may, I based on the comments that I had heard, I was going to suggest that it be introduced, but with whatever revisions that the council wanted, and it can be brought back. But again, that can happen at a later time. Our sense of urgency was you don't have anything on the books. We can't tell folks that come to the counter what the requirements are. They're going to submit an application. I do believe legally, if the application comes in and we accept it, we can adopt something and apply those new rules because there's no vested right to that permit. But you will get folks that complain, and you could get a legal challenge. I think on the average, we're okay there. But again, our goal is to get something in place quickly that we thought addressed some of the key concerns.
So if I can add, so if someone comes in and asks to have their garage enlarged to an 800 square foot garage, and we come down with the ordinance that says 500 square feet AUD, that's all they get?
Yes.
So I agree with Mr. Sinanian. We need to go forward and obtain the consensus that'll give us 4 votes. But what I would like to do, rather than discuss it and then see where we are with the consensus and then introduce it, I'd like to introduce what we have now, and let's hammer this out next week, and if not next week, the week after. So at least we're going to be setting it up for success rather than delaying.
I agree.
Do you need 4 votes for introducing it?
No,
just
one person.
Yeah, I mean, we can.
That's fine.
Yeah, let's introduce
It can be done so long as we realize that that doesn't mean there's 4 vote commitment.
We're fine doing that. I think The only thing I think there might be consensus on so far is the covenant issue, but maybe even not there, but to make it in line with Councilmember Sinanian's suggestion to have it either the occupant lives on site, the owner lives on site, or he or she agrees not to rent the unit, the entire property out as one rental as opposed to two.
And that renter is not allowed to, is prohibited from renting the AUD.
I mean the ADU.
ADU.
Well, again, that would be the requirement. It would be one that the renter be rented as one unit altogether.
How about the rest of it? The size of the units? We talked about so many other things.
No, I know.
Just saying what there's
I
consensus
had,
about.
points of disagreement were on square footage, the maximum square footage, on whether to require all properties within historic districts, not just the contributors, to be not visible from the street and to be compatible. And I'm not sure what the other requirement was.
Yeah, compatible with the
And
design.
then I heard some disagreement or need for call for further discussion on the FAR.
Yeah. The FAR, the carport. These are the issues that we need to talk about.
Okay, then do I have
I just need somebody to introduce it.
Someone introduce this?
I'll introduce it.
Okay.
So will staff be meeting with us and help us hone the issues?
We can brief you. We can't.
You should hone us. We don't want to come up here and hash it out. It's like making sausages.
Well, we can only brief you. We can't and throw some suggestions out there, but we can't take that direction and bring it back to you. Before actually bringing it to you and say, here are the different things that we'll do.
We honor the Brown Act.
Distill down what the range of options would be that are agreeable to you, and then you can debate those here in public.
All right, it's been introduced.
So we have that, but we also need a motion to initiate the change to
The mayor who introduced it.
Councilmember
Najarian, Councilmember Najarian did.
Gee, garbage.
I'll move the item to initiate the
Motion?
change.
Okay.
Second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmembers Garpetian,
I thought we didn't need a vote.
This is to initiate the permanent ordinance that will come back, that has to go to the Planning Commission and come back to you. That's to initiate that process.
Let me understand what I'm voting for, because anything you want to change in the future, you still need 4 votes. So it's not going to be very
All this
I want
is
to understand
just
what I'm voting on.
So you're telling us right now with this vote, start the process and go figure out a permanent, long-lasting solution that could be 500 square feet, could be 800, could be 1,200 square feet. But start that process, staff. Go work through the Planning Commission.
Yes.
Councilmember Garpetian, yes. Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item on the agenda is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Council may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. City manager may refer the matter to the appropriate department for an investigation and report.
I have 2 cards. First, Joseph Isagulian. Is he here?
He may have left.
Joseph?
He's gone.
Okay, I'll call Mike Mohill. There he is. Okay.
Good evening, council members. My name is Mike Mohill. On January 24, I came before council and made the following statements concerning Councilman Najarian. Councilman Najarian nominated himself for the Chair's Airport Commission, and nobody on council would second his nomination. Mr. Najarian begged to be appointed to the Airport Commission so he could brag about the appointment on his next election mailers. Recently, when Mayor Devine called for counting the votes for term limits, Councilman Najarian stated, quote, "My comments expletive at this time." What did Mr. Najarian mean by expletive? Expletive is defined by Webster Dictionary as swear words, obscenity, profanity, and 4-letter words. Last December, city staff brought back to council the South Glendale Community Plan in which zoning was being discussed. Council spoke about traffic circulation and better public transportation. Also being discussed again was to bring in more affordable housing into an area already saturated with low-income apartment complexes, Mayor Devine. As a result, hastening and creating more traffic problems and noise. After nearly 12 years on council and previously on the city's Traffic and Parking Commission, Councilman Nigerian acted surprised and concerned about the congestion of South Glendale, a problem he created when he approved many of the mega construction projects throughout the city with narrow streets and limited parking. It seems Mr. Nigerian has a problem with hearing. When the residents living near the proposed Aloft Hotel wanted to downzone the area and requested an EIR report, he said no. And he furthermore had the audacity to state the proposed hotel located outside of the DSP zone is now downtown. Mr. Nigerian violated the law he had approved back in 2006. One could argue if Mr. Nigerian was reelected to council in April for a fourth term, he would probably violate any new regulation for the proposed South Glendale plan. Last week, Mr. Nigerian called me an empty can rather than addressing the issues I had brought forward. On November 15, 2016, at council, City Manager Ochoa suggested taking the $39 million from the Demise Redevelopment Agency, which the city will receive over the next 3 to 5 years, and place that money into an irrevocable trust fund in order to generate about $1 million in interest to pay CalPERS in the next 10 years. What is $1 million when our retirement pension obligations to CalPERS is $600 million? For the past several years, the taxpayers of Glendale have been sending this corrupt pension system CalPERS about $22 million annually. And Mr. Ochoa stated in 5 years the taxpayers' bill to CalPERS would more than double to a whopping $49 million annually. Councilman Nigerian acted surprised again, calling the report mind-boggling. Mr. Nigerian, for years, has been receiving thousands of dollars from our CalPERS union workforce and been defending their one-sided employment contracts to the detriment of working families who have to put food on the table. In 1985, the country of Yugoslavia developed the Yugo. It had the distinct feeling of something assembled at gunpoint. Carpeting was standard, and it featured a rear window defroster, reported to keep one's hands warm while you push the car. The engine went kapooey. The electrical system was, such as it was, with sizzle. And things would just fall apart off the car. Time magazine listed the Yugo as one of the 50 worst cars of all time. It seems that every 4 years, when Mr. Nigerian runs for city council, he promises the moon and he delivers a Yugo. Thank you.
Bill Weissman.
Good evening, Mayor Devine, council members, city staff, and the public. My name is Bill Weissman from far north Glendale. I wasn't actually planning on speaking tonight, but, things come up. I was puttering around in the kitchen, and I had the afternoon special city council meeting on in the background, and my ears perked up when I heard the report from the Downtown Glendale Association and the Montrose Shopping Park Association about the various holiday promotions and things of that nature. And my ears kind of perked up when I heard the DGA representative and our city manager having a discussion about let me see if I can get this right, non-secular issues regarding displays. And it occurred to me I should mention that secular means non-religious, so non-secular means non-religious, which is a double negative. I'm really not giving you a hard time. I know it seems that way. I think non-sectarian was what was meant. And one of the things that concerned me, a little bit of a side issue, is I guess the holiday elk displayed in the median on Brand Boulevard have been subject to poaching. Did I hear that correctly? The city's elk are being stolen.
That's what they said.
And I kind of refer to them as holiday elk almost as a term of art, because when I say the word holiday, I'm actually being inclusive of all the holidays that happen around the winter solstice. That would be Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, Kwanzaa, Armenian Christmas, any of the others that I may have been missing. And I believe I heard Council Member Garpetian asking about why there were no Merry Christmas signs in the signage, since I believe his words were 90% of the population is Christian. Well, actually, that's not true. I went and looked up the figures to see what it is. And for the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area, and you can find this on the Pew Research website, so it's actual facts, not alternative facts. 65% of residents of the greater Los Angeles metro area identify as Christian, and that's split roughly 50-50 between Catholics and Protestants. And if you've studied any history, you know that those two groups, even though they both call themselves Christians, don't necessarily agree with each other. The next biggest group in affiliation in the LA metro area is no affiliation, 25%. That would be me, my wife, quite a number of other people. 1 out of every 4 of us is a no affiliation. And the remaining 10% are lumped together into non-Christian faiths, which are basically Muslims and Jews and Scientologists and whoever else fits down there in the grab bag. And I noticed that the city attorney's office is, this is an area where I think the council is to tread lightly. And I think a good example is what has happened with the city of Santa Monica. The city of Santa Monica used to have an official holiday display, and it was mainly, Christmas displays and nativity scenes and things of that nature. Well, other groups such as the atheists or the Satanists, or pick whatever group you want, all come in demanding equal time, and they start trying to game the admissions process for getting your display admitted to be an official part of the city display. And the city of Santa Monica finally had to punt and say, hey, forget it. No more displays. Not going to do it. So just as a little bit of explanation, I have no objection. I do not take any offense if anyone wishes me a Merry Christmas. I take no offense at the Christmas tree lighting ceremony in the Montrose Shopping Park. I was there, so was Mayor Devine. I saw you. And I'm sorry for others that did not get invited. But, I think the takeaway for this is be careful what you wish for if you want to start accentuating, one group's religion or religious observances over that of other groups. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike.
Madam Mayor, if I may. I just want to, for Mr. Wiseman, I did.
Spot on.
Just
1 second, please, 1 second.
He has a
For Mr.
comment.
Wiseman, I did not say the entire greater Los Angeles area. I was a figure of speech when I said 90%, but at least 55% of Glendale is, or 65 or 70% is Christian. And there's nothing wrong with saying Merry Christmas to your fellow Christians, or Happy Hanukkah, or Happy whatever you believe in or you don't believe in. So I don't appreciate the threatening tone that it may be something different. We don't wish anything. We just wish peace and equality for everyone. So I don't appreciate that tone.
Okay. Mike Van Gorder.
Hello. So I am one of the leaders of a team for Progressive Action for Glendale. It's a group of progressive activists, and one of the teams that I'm in charge of is the Affordable Housing Initiative, or the South Glendale Development Plan sort of watchdog or what have you. One of our members came to the last city council in the neighborhood meetings, and he was told, okay, come back to the next one, come back to the city council meeting on the 31st, because we're going to talk about affordable housing initiatives. And it turns out that all that we really talked about today was mother-in-law houses, which is obviously important because it's a brave new world. We got to figure that out. But conspicuously absent from the discussions that I've heard coming from City Hall is rent stabilization ordinances. Because we have a ton of new units for sure, and again, a lot of them are ludicrously expensive and out of reach. But there's a lot of units that are already here in our neighborhoods that are getting more and more pricey to be there, and there's no protection for renters against the whims of their landlord. I got my the fellow that came with us last time. He moved in here 6 years ago. He's paying $1,050 now. 6 years later, he's paying a little over $1,400. So that's more than the 3% that our neighbors in Burbank and our neighbors in Los Angeles get to enjoy that level of protection. So, I mean, the new units that we're going to be adding to our housing stock won't really amount to much if we don't have any way of protecting the people who decide to rent those units out from a 20%, a 15% rate increase that they're just not going to be prepared for. Because again, like a lot of us are already cost burdened, and if the housing crunch continues unabated, which again, Glendale is a really attractive place to live. It's got great schools, it's got good parks, it's got great access to freeways. It is statistically very, very safe, which commendable. But if we can't afford to live here, then we're not going to be able to live here. And a 500 square foot mother-in-law house is not. It's going to be a drop in the bucket compared to the needs of the city. So I would really, really like to see rent stabilization ordinances pushed pushed at least towards the top of the things that you guys are going to be considering for the present future here. Thank you.
Thank you. You should know that last week we had an agenda item on rent stabilization. It was postponed, and it will be coming back to council, and I'm not sure when. Mr. Toad, do you have any idea?
I'd have to defer to city attorney. I don't think we have a date yet. We're working on a few additional suggestions based on the input we received so far from stakeholders, and I can't give you a date as of yet.
Okay. Stay tuned. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
It's coming. It's coming. Okay. That's all the cards I have. Next item, please.
Madam Mayor, is there any new business?
New business?
Madam Mayor, we did have an item of new business based on a closed session, but after thinking about it a little bit more, we do have to bring that back to you and parse out that reporting out. There's two items related to that item, and one of them will be subject to appeal, another one will not. And so I want to make sure that the reportable action covers both of that. So I can explain that more next week when we come back.
Mr. Councilman Najarian?
Madam Mayor, I just want to say that I have been getting emails and texts from supporters who ask me why don't I reprimand Mr. Mohill for his comments. He's clearly on the campaign trail for something, and he's clearly a very frustrated man, frustrated that he's calling for change in a city that is one of the safest cities, that has one of the best fire departments, some of the best schools, some of the best maintained streets and downtown areas. That's a frustration. But he has every right to say whatever he wants when he gets up to the dais. We respect his First Amendment right. I do want to add that Glendale, as we talk about CalPERS, and this is a continual discussion that we have on the council. Glendale is in a system that we cannot get out of, but as a result of very close and successful negotiations with our labor unions, we are perhaps the very best city in terms of contributions by the employees versus the contributions by the employer, the city. We have a two-tier retirement system, and we've done a new plan where we have a rate stabilization fund where any huge increases in CalPERS can be offset with a fund balance. So I feel really sorry for Mr. Mohill, but it is his right to make these comments before the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
We are adjourned at 8:13.